Yeah. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 14th, 2023. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. We are resuming work on S5, the Affordable Heat Act. And this morning we're taking additional testimony this morning, including here from the PUC. And we'll start with Mr. Coda. So, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you very much.
As they say, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Senator Ray, members of the Senate Natural Resources Energy Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to return and talk about S Bill number 5. And to be clear, the majority of members of the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association do not support this bill, do not wish you to pass this bill. And I'll discuss those reasons why. There are 12 significant ones. And understanding that it will likely pass despite that objection, I hope you'll at least entertain a discussion about the 12 reasons why we think there should be significant changes to the legislation. Some of them I brought up last time I testified, and then the second time. Some of these issues I discussed in July 2020 when I was first approached about the idea of creating a performance standard for the thermal sector. I will not stop talking about them when this becomes law, if this becomes law, because I think they're significant. And thank you for the opportunity to say them on the record. So in the next 15 minutes, I'd like to do that.
Okay. And just so that I can keep people at home on your testimony, have you submitted electronic copy of your testimony there?
No, I was just going to talk from the hip, but if there's anything of the 12 things that I've brought up again over the last 2 years that you would like to specifically change, I'm happy to work with. But these are issues that are going to be very familiar to you.
Okay. And
they haven't been answered satisfactorily. Although I will give, in the spirit of Valentine's Day, members of this committee have asked the right questions. We absolutely will. And I will highlight those. They just haven't been answered yet. Okay. So number 1, July, not January. Why do we care about a month? Simply put, we sell a majority of our product in about 45 days. Coldest 45 days of the year. As you know, or as I will explain, the obligated parties are not the out-of-state wholesalers. They are the people that sat in this chair, people like Tony James, that drives across the river, fills up a 2,800-gallon oil truck, comes back across the river. In January, he and Diane are in their office in Bellows Falls, working 18-hour days. It's a labor issue. They don't have lawyers. They don't have consultants. They don't have anyone in suits that hangs out at the PUC. What they have is their family that is providing essential commodity. They don't have the time to do this, nor do they have the cash flow. Remember how fuel is purchased. We go to the terminal, North Walpole, or Springfield, Mass, or Burlington, Vermont, and the second the tap turns off of a 9,000-gallon tanker truck or the 2,800-gallon pedal truck, the money flows EFT out of the bank accounts of the local fuel dealer to the wholesaler. Then they deliver the fuel, and sometimes it's cash on the barrel. Most of the time, it's 14 days, 30 days. Sometimes, as several senators have told me, they've benefited from small local fuel dealers that have allowed the float, to allow them to get through January before they could pay them, because that's what we've been doing for 100 years. In our community where we have to meet their customers in the grocery store, and if you don't deliver, if you don't give someone a little bit extra time, well, they might freeze. And the fact that we're talking about, we don't know the number yet, we will, but we're talking about 7 cents a gallon or 70 cents a gallon or $7 a gallon, that's a significant amount of money to dispense on January 1 when the cash flow is the worst for these local heating fuel companies. Again, 12 employees, 2,000 customers, 2 million gallons. That's the average. So when they're at the biggest cash flow crunch, when they're at the biggest labor force crunch, we are putting this program on them on January 1. Move it 6 months. But the biggest issue here is to find the obligated party. A lot of good questions were asked of Mr. Hand, the PUC, and of AEG Laura Murphy. There is still time to define. There absolutely is. I'd be happy to show you the language if that's something is of interest to you. But the reality is the language that you have now, the entity that makes the first sale of heating fuel into or in the state of Vermont for consumption within the state includes 80% of the retail fuel delivery companies. If you put 100 gallons in a skid tank in North Walpole and you bring it to Vermont and then you resell it out of your pickup truck, you are technically a reseller, an importer of fuel. And why do that? Because remember what happened 10 years ago when we moved from the fuel gross receipts tax to the 2 cent per gallon tax in this great compromise between Senator Ash, Representative Ansel, and the regulated community, which was let's make it a cents per gallon tax so we know exactly what it is, and let's get rid of the minimums so that no one can say, oh, I didn't sell enough to pay the tax. Everyone pays, including that skid tank. If you want to push it upstream, which I agree, you want to push it on 12 wholesalers, 14 wholesalers, rather than 200 individual retail entities that sell fuel in and around Vermont, then define it. Because right now it's defined as the entity that makes the first sale of heating fuel into or in the state of Vermont for consumption within the state. Make it clear that the retailer, the Tony James of the world, the Sherry Greens of the world, they're not the ones that are the obligated parties. And the only way you can do that is to change the language to define the obligated party as the wholesale supplier of heating fuel and not the retail distributor of heating fuel. Third, when you heard from some fuel dealers, right, on February 3rd, they had boots on, they had calluses, they drop their G's when they tell you if they're coming or going. But they are brilliant. Tony James can install a heat pump blindfolded, and he can drive a 12-ton truck up an icy road backwards. And when he tells you that there are certain applications for heat pumps, which it just doesn't work, it's not because he doesn't want to sell heat pumps, he sells a lot of heat pumps. It's because he has to go to the grocery store and look that person in the face. So here's our kerosene conundrum. We have a boutique fuel. Why do we use kerosene? Kerosene's more like Jet A. It's the #1 distillate, right? Number 2 distillate is heating oil with the diesel fuel. The difference between kerosene and jet fuel is that there's lubricity, or there's sulfur in jet fuel because it adds lubricity for the engines. It's the most expensive fuel. We all agree. Why do we use it? Because those tanks have to be outside. Why do they have to be outside? Because there's no basement. Because these are modular homes. These are mobile homes. You cannot use biodiesel in these tanks. Why? Biodiesel is, it'll get cold, it will gel up and it won't fire, right? So we can't use that opportunity as we could with heating oil in order to comply and to generate credits. And as you heard, Tony James and others, you cannot move these community of people that rely on kerosene easily into electric heat. Why? Because there is no basement. There's water pipes running underneath. There's no insulation. Even a stone, my grandmother's old stone house with a stone basement, with a dirt floor, provides some level of protection from the elements for a tank and for water pipes. Not so in trailers. That's why kerosene, the most expensive fuel, is still used. In fact, 2,800 homes in Vermont rely on kerosene that receive fuel assistance. Another 5,000 don't receive it, but still rely on kerosene. That may be insignificant in the scope of 250,000 homes, but it's significant to them. How can they reduce their cost of heating their home and reduce carbon? Well, they can't use biodiesel. Electric heat doesn't work so great for them. They can switch to propane, but they don't get any credit for it in this bill. You can change that. You can change that. Speaking of fuel systems, we've got 2,800 kerosene heated homes. We have 3,635 propane heated homes, 7,360 oil heated homes, according to Richard Giddings, who runs this program for the state of Vermont. Our prices are regulated by the Department of Children and Families under a contract signed every year. Are these gallons obligated? Is the cost of those gallons passed on to the state of Vermont? $25, $30 million that you send to Vermonters to continue to use fossil fuels? You can stop that. Not pay them. That would be cruel. They need fossil fuels. That's why the state of Vermont pays to keep them using fossil fuels. This is important. I hope with a Valentine's Day card to Commissioner Bolio or through force of law that we fix this form. I hope I'm not the only one that agrees. We group dyed diesel, propane, kerosene, and heating oil on one line when we pay our fuel tax, which goes towards low-income weatherization. And when we pay the petroleum, take up propane, we pay the petroleum cleanup fee that pays for cleaning up spills. I hope, for compliance sake, for sanity's sake, for the PUC's sake, for the obligated party's sake, that we break out those four fuels in this form and in whatever subsequent form that comes with it. But that brings up the obvious question. Number two, what do we use it for? We sell 200 million gallons of this stuff every year in Vermont. Only half of it goes for thermal purposes. 60 million gallons goes to the cars and trucks with green license plates. 100 million gallons, 75 million gallons goes to residential heating, 25 million gallons goes to commercial heating. The rest, somewhere between 30 and 40 million gallons, depending on the year, goes for other purposes. What other purposes, Matt? Train engines, car ferries, skidders, feather bunchers, cut-to-length wood processors, forwarders, delimiters, loader lashers, log loaders, whole tree chippers, stationary screening systems, and firewood processor. It powers thousands of vehicles that are exempt from the motor fuel excise tax, including school buses, plow trucks, bulldozers, and farm tractors. These sales are not insignificant. 30 or 40 million gallons per year, about half of what we sell for residential thermal heating. Half of that goes to our farmers. Same stuff that goes in your tank that keeps you warm, keeps those farmers' tractors running. So the question is, all in or just thermal applications? You need to define it in the law, because when it goes to the PUC, they're going to review this tape. And they say, oh, Matt brought that up. What was the will of the committee? Well, let's state it. Because if the will of the committee is all in, say it. And then you have another issue, which is, what about all the uses of natural gas, propane, that are not used for thermal purposes? All in? That, admittedly, is a lot more complicated. Because when I sell you a gallon of propane, it may be used to heat your water. It may be used to heat air. It may be used to cook your food. But this is easy. The gallon of fuel oil that I sell to a farmer to run his tractor, is that obligated under this act? If it's not, it's simple to put it out. No, thermal purposes only. Here's the reason why you should keep it out. I don't think the trains, I don't think the loggers, I don't think the farmers should be paying for this program. You cannot, while you can, reduce your gallons of heating oil by installing an electric heat pump. You can't run a feather buncher on a heat pump. There's no way under this program as designed that all of the fuel that we sell for non-thermal purposes can find a way to recoup those losses. The idea is simple, right? We create a fee, acquire credits for the fuel that you don't want people to use, and provide that money to those who want to use less of it and use something else. That's fine, but that is not feather bunchers and farm tractors. Take it out. Define it in the law. We've created a short circuit, right? 12 months or 18 months or whatever long to pause the credits. I appreciate what Senator Watson was saying about how to define that, because I think it does need to be defined for those of us that are accumulating credits. We want to know that there's an active functioning market. So I have concerns about that, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it. But you can cap it, right? You can cap the amount that we pay for credits. That's something legislature can do. If the market goes awry, you can do what they do with the CME or the Merck and just shut off trading. You can do that. Or you can cap it and say in the law, credit shall be no more than X cents per gallon. That would provide some certainty for those individuals that want to purchase contracts from their suppliers, whether it's the consumer or the retailers. Put a cap on it. I'll go through the next real quick because I think they're super important, but I've been talking about them for 2 years and no action has been taken. No double counting. We are selling the same horse twice. Easy way to fix it, clean heat credits cannot be sold by electric utilities who are using the same product or service to meet their obligations under the Renewable Energy Standard Tier 3 program. If you like that language like I do, I'm happy to forward it on. I've suggested it for 2 years' time. No double counting. Don't sell the same horse twice because you are selling it twice. Fix the DDA, the designated default agent. As of now, it explicitly allows a for-profit company to become the DDA. What are we doing? This should be a non-profit entity at the very least. Preferably, it should be an agency of state government. I've heard people say, oh, well, the Office of Economic Opportunity, Sue Mittner over at Capstone, they're doing the Lord's work, but they can only do this. That's not true. They're doing it. They send people to my classes to learn how to fix oil burners. They're doing it. They're installing heat pumps. The idea that the agency that is helping the lowest income Vermonters make their homes warm, safe, and comfortable shouldn't be the one doing this, to me, is telling, because it tells me that someone who's sitting in this chair at a different time, on a different date, wants to make sure that the designated default agent can be a for-profit entity. And why wouldn't they? As you said, Senator McCormick, very accurately, you are creating a source of capital for a profit, for a for-profit company by requiring their competition to be their bank. We might not go willingly into the PUC if that's the proposition here. The government can tax us, they can charge us fees. We understand that. That's the way it's been forevermore. But the idea that a for-profit company can demand that we be their bank as they try to put us out of business, it's absurd. And you explicitly allow this. And every time I bring it up, someone says, no, can't do that. I don't know who that person is, but once we find the DDA, we'll know who it is. We'll know. All right, GREET is good. If you want to analyze what GREET, G-R-E-E-T.
No, I had a question. I'm trying to understand the context. Oh, sorry, Sandra Bray. Thank you. So just so I understand your critique there, is what you're saying that you believe that there is someone advocating for the DDA to be a for-profit because I think the subtext was corruption, if I'm correct?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. What was the subtext?
Subtext is every time I bring up the fact that a for-profit entity can become the designated default agent, there's no uptake. I don't know why. I don't know why.
And
every time I suggest that the Office of Economic Opportunity that is providing these services, remember the DDA is the ones that we send the money to because we can't determine what income level our customers are, right? So we're sending money to the DDA because we're not going to ask for their income statements, but the Weatherization Office does this. So if this is a way to fund weatherization and modern wood stoves and cold climate heat pumps, they're perfectly situated to do this.
okay.
So why would Mr. Chips at Big Wood insist that no, for profit?
Okay, so that's
Something's curious there, and I can't figure it out, but I will get to the bottom of it. It's the last thing I do.
okay. I thought that's what I heard.
GREET is good. Why on page 17 we allow or alternatives of comparable analytical rigor to fit the Vermont thermal sector context? I get it. GREET has to be adapted, but this language specifically implies that there is going to be an alternative to GREET. I don't know why it's in there. I would remove it. I'm almost done. Fix the tag. I've been saying this since July of 2020. When the Climate Council is largely represented by the utilities and not the people that are delivering heat on the ground, you get what you get. You've got all these fuels that are not represented either on the Climate Council or the tag. Allow kerosene, allow coal, sell coal here. Natural gas, heating oil, propane, to be part of the process to determine what the value is associated for the fossil fuels or the opposite of credits, and then what the credit value is for the replacement fuel or service. Finally, I'm sorry. Wow, Tom, did you pick the wrong regulator? You picked the wrong regulator. The PUC is well equipped to determine whether or not programs like Efficiency Vermont or electric utilities and natural gas utilities are working. They have a compelling reason to send their lawyers and consultants to 112 State Street. Best regulator is the one that can park a truck. Who is that? That's the people with guns, badges, and lights on their trucks, not the DOT. They're the ones that are going to catch the cheats. No offense, but not the PUC. And when you are regulating a commodity that can so easily travel across the river, it so easily can travel to the Massachusetts border, the New York border, when you have no idea if that company is bought, sold 3 times before the next quarter, how are we going to protect the honest fuel dealers here? It's the wrong regulator. So if this bill passes, we'll design a program. It'll come back to the legislature with all the costs in it. Then the legislature will go after something very unusual. If they realize, oh, Secretary Moore was right, it is about 70 cents a gallon. You have to pass a law that stops this from taking effect. Don't pass a law. Whatever that charge is, whatever that credit cost is, it's a passive check back, it's not a real check back. You are designing perhaps the most complicated and consequential policy change in the thermal sector that we've ever seen, not just in Vermont, anywhere. Not Oregon, not Colorado, not California. This is different. We're different. Should the legislature, not just Elkhart, the entire legislature, review what work they have done and determine whether or not it can be achieved? We don't know what the credit costs are going to be, but that's just part of the equation. What's the compliance costs? What does it cost to create a credit marketplace where we buy and sell credits? You bring in someone from CME or ISIN, they can tell you how much it costs. Where does that money come from? I'm going to assume it comes from the regulated entities. We don't even know who the regulated entities are. We haven't defined obligated parties, and if we have defined obligated parties as the retailers, we don't know who they are. I might know who some of them are, but I don't know who all of them are. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. I got 10, and you said there were 12. You got 12? Maybe I counted 2 lumped in together. We can talk after.
I went undifferent.
There were a couple, sorry. No, just, there were a couple points that I think kind of blended together, but I was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Happy to share written testimony, suggest language change if any of them are of interest to the committee.
Since you mentioned the issue of paperwork in January, I might take this opportunity to say that I thought it was obvious that I was expressing sympathy for the dealers on that. Apparently, it's a scandalous video of me expressing sympathy and described it as. I was not. I was agreeing with that point. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Yes, we do.
Good morning. So I see Drew Carlson up on the screen. Are you here this morning to speak on behalf of Global Partners?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Hi, members of the committee.
Thank you.
I'm ready whenever you guys are. I can start off.
Yes, please. So you are, if you could just introduce yourself for the record, and then the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Drew Carlson. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at Global Partners. Global appreciates the opportunity to present comments to the Affordable Heat Act. We are proud to serve the energy needs of Vermonters through our terminal location in Burlington and approximately 95 convenience stores and supply locations throughout the state. Global's terminal in Burlington is a key distribution hub and the only bulk liquid energy terminal located in the state. As such, we believe Global is uniquely positioned to provide commentary concerning Vermont's energy policy and to help the state meet its climate goals. Our view is that the goals laid out in the Vermont Climate Action Plan are best accomplished through performance-based programs that avoid specific technology choices. Open competition to deliver the cleanest fuels at the lowest cost is key for effective policy. Concerning the Affordable Heat Act, we believe that clarifying compliance obligations is crucial. The point of obligation should be placed on the entity that brings fuel into Vermont, whether they're a wholesaler or a retailer. This structure avoids compliance and uncertainty for stakeholders. We also believe that flexibility in credit acquisition and eligible measures is an important design consideration that should expand rather than limit emission reductions. Obligated parties should be able to source credits from other obligated parties and not just end users. In addition, many low carbon fuel programs enable emissions reductions in the supply chain to qualify for the generation of credits, which is driving significant innovation in the fuels market. Vermont should consider a similar policy design and allow projects that diminish the carbon intensity of petroleum products outside the state that are ultimately used within Vermont to qualify for credit generation as well. Finally, early action credits are an important component to maximizing emissions reductions. Additional thought should be given to creating an incentive for early over-compliance. Early emissions reductions are more impactful when accomplished sooner rather than later. In other words, due to the cumulative effects of carbon, reductions today are a better mitigation tool than far-off plans. In summary, taking the above discussed policy principles, compliance certainty, and flexible policy design into account will result in better environmental outcomes, which is a shared goal for all of us. Thank you for your considerations.
Thank you. And can you describe a little bit Global's role in Vermont, so we better understand how you fit into the bigger picture?
Yeah, so as I outlined, so Global, we have terminal locations throughout the Northeast and in Vermont. So we have a terminal in Burlington. We're a large wholesale supplier of heating oil, diesel, ethanol, gasoline, kerosene. And then we have locations again throughout the Northeast. We're also on the retail side as well. We have about 1,700 convenience stores and gas stations that we either own, lease, or supply. And again, that's through the Northeast and a little bit down to the Mid-Atlantic as well.
There's I'm not sure if you're familiar with the transportation fuel market in Oregon, maybe outside where you do business, but we've been looking at their experience with various biofuels and the impact on costs over time and availability. Have you looked at the current market in Vermont for biofuels, and do you have any thoughts about how S5, for instance, might alter those markets? And maybe you can talk a little bit about pricing of different types of fuel right now and the impact on, I think, in essence, creating a bigger biofuels market here.
Yeah, so I think in general, our view is that policy can drive the market, right? And so you see that in California and other states as well. The fuels will flow to where there's opportunity, and I think this is a huge opportunity for the state. And other states are going to look to emulate this model as well, depending on how it's structured. Pricing is a difficult, that's a difficult question. There's so many variables that come into it, the market, that it's tough to say. I think, I will say that anytime you pass policy, these things cost money, right? And there is a cost at the end of the day, and it's up to the state whether how that comes into play. It's just a difficult question that it's sort of hard to answer, I guess, at this point. It depends how it's structured and how it looks, right?
Sure. Does Global create biofuel blends, or do you bring in sort of the raw resources and other people do the blending? What's your role in that marketplace?
Yeah, so we can do both. It depends on the terminal. In Burlington, I believe we have to get it, we get it railed in. So it can get railed in, from our Albany facility. In some other terminal locations, we have the ability to blend.
Senator White.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. I had a question for you about your stance around the early emissions reductions and prioritizing those and understanding your take on the bill. And then I also had a question generally about biofuels and freezing temperature, because we've had commentary on that. So the first one, if I'm understanding your point correctly, you're saying that having the ability to gain credits earlier before the program begins is important. And I'm wondering if you've had a chance to review that change between the clean heat standard of last session and the Affordable Heat Act of this session, which does allow for measures that are done starting, I believe, January 1 of 2023, also already going backwards, to be used towards goals. I'm wondering if that's a change that you feel has addressed that concern, or if there's further work that needs to be done.
No, I think so. I think that addressed the concern. I think that's just something that we support, right? And so early over compliance just helps, in general, if the state meet its goals. It helps, companies like Global, make the transition and make the proper, upgrades to infrastructure, things like that. So I think that's something I just wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Just wanted to understand that a little deeper. And then I'm wondering if you could speak to how biofuels can be used in homes that are, for example, modular homes or mobile homes, or homes that have traditionally been using kerosene.
That's something I'm not an expert in, some of the technical pieces like that. I know Matt Coda and some other folks have spoken at length about it. So I'm not totally sure, again, some technical pieces there that I know you guys have spoken to some experts. So I'm just not, totally sure. That's something I could get back to you on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other
Senator Bray.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlson? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
And with that, invite Mr. Lance Marinello and Mr. Nauer to join us at the table. If you'd like to pull up the second chair and tag team wrestling. So we have hard copy of the bill and your blue line of the bill. So, okay, thanks for coming back. Love to hear what your thoughts are on suggestions for edits to the bill. For people who are watching, who may not have heard all the prior testimony, I think in general we laid out a policy on reducing carbon emissions related to greenhouse gas emissions related to heating fuels, and asked the PUC to work, help define the program that would could implement that. So we've been doing a lot of work making a bill and possible ways to build out such a program. So let's figure we've allocated ample time so we can really walk through and really hear in detail the proposals you'd like to make.
Thank you. For the record, Kyle Landis Marinello, General Counsel at the Vermont Public Utility Commission.
And my name is Tom Dower. I'm the policy director with the PUC.
So as you have in front of you, and we have it up on the screen, we do have some recommended changes to the latest version of the bill. I'll just reiterate what we've said before, that we're not taking a position in support of or opposed to the bill. We're just focused on, if this is passed and the clean heat standard is given to us to implement, how do we increase the chances of success? So I'll just go through some of our latest suggested changes, and please chime in with any questions.
This is the Valentine's edition. Okay.
So the first one is, and this is a series of changes that we previewed in our previous testimony, but we've now gone through at the committee's direction and shown what a red line would look like if we were to make those changes to really focus on the default delivery agent as the true default, that's going to be the primary entity doing the clean heat measures. And if an obligated party wants to meet its clean heat standard obligations a different way, they would need to come to the Public Utility Commission and get our approval to do that. So that is a significant change, but we think it's an important one that would really be helpful here. And so if that happens, a big benefit from an implementation standpoint is you do away with the need for a system of tradable clean heat credits. We'd still have the clean heat credits, but we wouldn't need a trading system for them. And so that's a lot of these strikeouts here.
Can I ask a quick question on that one? So I think one of the questions people have had is, I mean, we don't have clean heat credits. We don't have experience with generating or trading them. But as people think about how they would participate in the program outlined by S5, there's an interest in making sure that we do the work at the lowest possible cost. And the shorthand for that usually is that we want to make sure there's a competitive marketplace. So have you thought about how having a default delivery agent that you have to opt out of impacts on the price and market for having a sort of a flexible and lowest cost possible clean heat credit market? I mean, that's a big question, but maybe you have some insight into that by looking at the operations of Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways to approach that question, and kind of big picture, trying to answer your direct question as well as give some big picture context to the changes that we propose. Is we're trying to eliminate multiple sources of uncertainty from the regulatory perspective. Right now, as the bill exists, we're directed to adopt a trading system, and we don't know how much that trading system would cost us. For a little bit of context, TJ Porth, the Department of Public Service, looked into the cost of the NEPOOL GIS system. This is the system that New England uses to track the generation and retirement of renewable energy certificates. So that's an analogy. And the annual cost of that is a little bit less than $1 million. Hopefully we would be able to do something here that would be less than $1 million per year.
And is that for the entire Northeast or like this?
Right, that's for the whole system, the New England system. So it's not, maybe what you're asking is that Vermont's share or the whole cost? And that's the whole cost.
But I also recognize that we're the only ones with the credit system. That we don't have that economies of scale, but they have to share the costs across the Northeast.
So that, I mean, that's one big unknown here is what's the cost of that system and how is it paid for? Another source of uncertainty is at the same time that we have this trading system, we're also obligated to have a default delivery agent. Without knowing how much work per year that DDA will be getting, is everyone just operating on the market and not using the default delivery agent? Or, you know, on the other extreme, is everyone using the default delivery agent and there's no trading going on? It's really hard for the PUC to know what is the cost of the DDA when we have that much uncertainty. Does the DDA need 5 employees or do they need 100 employees? Based on the amount of work that they expect year in, year out. And then another source of uncertainty is verification. If we've got, Mr. Coda said, you know, there's as few as 12 obligated parties or multiple hundreds, is everyone submitting a, you know, clean heat credit verification claim every year? Or would it be simpler to have one or several entities submitting those claims per year? So those are kind of the areas that we're trying to simplify by having a centralized approach with one or more default delivery agents. And I think to the question about competition, if the model was similar to the energy efficiency utility model that we have today, the efficiency utilities today aren't doing the installation of electric measures at people's houses. Those are contractors out in the field who are doing that work. So I'm not sure that moving to a more centralized default delivery agent model eliminates competition in the market or the variety of measures that could be implemented to comply.
I am not sure that I understood that last point you were making. Can you just say it again, or I apologize.
That's okay. So Chair Bray's question was, I'm going to paraphrase, if we move to a centralized approach, is it eliminating a marketplace? Were you talking about a marketplace or competition or flexibility?
Well, you were just talking about competition. and
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the point that you're making about competition.
So the way I think about it is there would still be a robust sector of clean heat measure installers out there. And they would do work with homeowners, business owners, and they would contract with the default delivery agent. You know, the DDA would really procure the credits that those contractors are generating.
Okay, thank you.
You know, if, as you've thought about it, one of the entities that could, is there a role for an aggregator in this model? Is there, could someone perform that function? That you can see, or is it that all interactions are either directly with the PUC, or someone steps out, files their own claim with you, and manages it back to you, or they manage it back to the default delivery agent? And I'm just floating that one out because some people said, well, an aggregator could be sort of this nimble market actor and see opportunities.
I don't think that the changes we propose would preclude the aggregators from participating.
Yeah, the idea is that default delivery agent is going to be looking at who can do these measures, get the greatest amount of emissions reductions at the least cost possible. And we would be regulating the default delivery agent or agents if it's more than one, and looking closely at what they spent and what reductions they got, the same way we regulate the energy efficiency utilities now.
So this is a question, borrowing a question back on energy efficiency utility, electric energy efficiency utility model that we already have. Are you aware of anyone who acts as an aggregator in that marketplace, that works, I don't know, partners with Efficiency Vermont and manages jobs, brings forward work, helps that marketplace work?
I'm unaware of anyone who I would characterize as an aggregator. I know that Efficiency Vermont partners with many organizations throughout the state to get work done. And Efficiency Vermont partners with the distribution utilities, it partners with the other efficiency utilities, it partners with the CAP agencies. So there's a lot of partnerships out there sending work to each other. I'm not sure if I would characterize any of them as an aggregator.
Sure. And, I think, I define the term, and I'm sort of swimming in this conversation to think about just how nimble you anticipate it being and to what degree you feel like it would bring forward the most cost-effective solutions. I'm guessing that part of the reason, well, I would ask you, I don't want to be guessing. So let me ask you, based on your experience with running Efficiency Vermont, you feel like it's been successful bringing forward the most cost-effective solutions for delivering the reduction of efficiency. I'm thinking on behalf of customers out there, they would want to know that the program's cost-effective. On the cost-effective side, sort of consumer value side of Efficiency Vermont as the model that is informing this recommendation.
Right, so I'll answer that in a couple of ways. One, this model is informed, I'd say, our goal to eliminate sources of uncertainty. And, I've heard other witnesses testify about, we want to lean on the PUC's experience in regulating performance-based programs. We have 20 plus years of regulating the Efficiency Vermont performance-based program. And so we're leaning on that experience that those existing statutory languages. So that's kind of informing this red line. As to the Efficiency Vermont cost effectiveness, there's a minimum level of cost effectiveness that they need to operate on as measured over a 3-year performance period. At the end of the day, the benefits of the programs that they offer need to the ratio, benefit cost ratio, that needs to be at least 1.2. So by definition, if they're doing their jobs, it needs to be cost effective. We also do what's called an overall performance assessment of all the efficiency utilities every 6 years. And as part of that, we ask the question, how is this entity doing relative to comparable entities, in the region, in the country, et cetera? And what we find is that Efficiency Vermont is operating at a cost of, that is similar to peers in the region.
In the early days of Efficiency Vermont, I'm guessing there were no comparisons because we were the first. Maybe this is, in a way, we're kind of going first on this model. Do you anticipate, well, it's probably not fair to ask you to speculate on like how that went for Efficiency Vermont back when it was the only one.
I would be speculating.
Okay, all right. Never mind that. That's fine. I just wanted to make that observation that at some point they might have been the only one, and yeah, there might be other measures that you could use to compare internally to like how it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, as Tom said, what we're trying to do is lean on places where we have some experience and some success, to be frank. I think that the energy efficiency utility model is looked to by a number of other states as a successful model that does get a lot of benefits at a low cost. The benefits outweigh the cost. And so, and I'll mention just one other part of this change that's really beneficial from an enforcement and implementation standpoint is this makes very clear to the obligated parties that you need to make a payment to the default delivery agent, or you need to have some other already approved plan that the commission has said you can do as an alternate. And so, while I understand that from the obligated parties' perspective, they might like the idea of having a number of options, when it comes to actually enforcement, at the end of the day, someone hasn't done anything. It's much more difficult to enforce at that point if they have a list of options and they can say, well, we thought we were complying with option B or C or D. And with this model, it's very clear. You've either got option B, C, or D pre-approved by us, in which case we compare what you did to what was approved, or you've made a payment to the default delivery agent. If you haven't done one of those two, you've got a problem. That's very clear. It's much easier to enforce, and I think it would increase compliance.
Thank you, Chair Bray. Without this recommended change, would you still potentially be able to do what you described? Through the process,
Yes, that's still possible, but it would be a more complicated process for actually doing enforcement. And we might have, I did enforcement for about 8 years at the Attorney General's office. And one of the things you see when someone gets a notice of violation is they often have a lot of reasons why they thought what they were doing was in compliance. And the more avenues they have to argue that they thought they were complying, the more difficult enforcement is. And so we would very much prefer a clean, bright line. This is what you do to comply. And I think that maybe what the obligated parties find is preferable too, because it ensures a level playing field by decreasing the chances of entities finding ways around the legal obligations.
So I guess I'm still confused then. So could you still structure a program in that way without this language?
No, I don't think we could, because if the statute directly tells the obligated parties that they can comply in any of the following ways, then I don't think we would have the leeway in the rulemaking process to say, oh, you need pre-approval for anything other than a default delivery agent.
I understand what you're saying now. Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate that you're, starting from the point of managing a certain amount of uncertainty, any business or government venture. So I appreciate that. And one of the things that, in talking about this program and bill, I think based on my understanding, at least of efficiency from outside history, is that this program should be a sort of a self-aware program, a learning program, something designed to say we launch and then we have a system of monitoring and assessment that lets us help with it evolve. No one imagines a perfect program on day one. Nothing ever started that way. So maybe this is a question, but we're talking about uncertainty right now. Later on, can we maybe come back and talk about provisions in the bill that would help build in that kind of self-awareness, like the kind of reporting and assessment that would allow both you as implementers and the legislature and people outside all see what's happening and say, we're good on A, B, C, D, and E, and we should adjust F, that kind of thing. So I don't know if you feel like that's already baked into the bill, but I think it'd be helpful for us to talk about that a little bit, because it seems as though the anxiety some people feel about specifying everything prior to even commencing this intention with saying we can launch with a very solid plan, but then we're going to monitor and adjust as we learn. So that. So is anything else more on
We've just flagged
this
this,
section?
I'm sorry, Chair. I was just gonna say, we flagged the statutory provisions that this language is modeled after. That's all in Title 30, this is all dealing with the energy efficiency utilities. And this is really almost word for word language, including broad supervision over these entities, almost to the same extent as the supervision that we have over utilities by entities thrown or the default delivery agents is who we have that broad supervisory authority over. We can examine their books and see how they're spending their money. Okay.
So efficiency conferences, it gets, comes forward to the, you see the demand resource plan. There's sort of an annual, I don't know if it's annual or what the frequency is, sort of a true performance, meaning performance metrics and spending with that. Are you anticipating a similar process for the default delivery?
Unless we learned of in the rulemaking process, something that would work better, my default is let's go with the regulatory paradigms that we know are effective.
So technical change here that to make clear there could be more than one default delivery agent. I'm just flagging in the definitions section, and this was in our last comments, that the Attorney General's office is working on a proposed clarification of who the obligated party is. I did see about an hour ago, Jeff Hand has sent around some language to you, Chair Bray, and I do think that language clarifies who the obligated party is. I don't think it clarifies it in the way that Mr. Cota might have been looking for. It's, as I understand, that's looking at who's bringing the fuel into the state, but it gives a very bright line, and there's a benefit to that.
So we'll make sure we get a copy of Mr. Hand's language and post it, maybe have it back in and make sure that it circulates. Have you, and I guess run it past you as well as an implementer to see if you're supportive of that language and find how, or maybe you've already evaluated it and it seems like a workable solution.
Yes, the latter. We have looked at that language, and that does seem to create real clarity, and that's beneficial from an implementation and enforcement standpoint.
Just so we will do that in more detail, but just so that people at the table or people watching know what that, can you just characterize how it defines obligated party relative to heating fuel?
Yes, so it's saying the provision for natural gas remains the same, but for other heating fuels, it's saying that it's the entity that imports the fuel into Vermont for ultimate consumption in Vermont. And so whoever owns title to the fuel at the time they cross the border, whether that's a wholesale entity or a retail entity, that's the obligated party. With an exception of if it's just passing through the state and ultimately being consumed somewhere else, that does not come with an obligation.
Okay, so crossing the state line, who the owner of the fuel, at the time they fuel it comes into Vermont, that becomes the obligated party.
Yes, and it's modeled after the way transportation fuels are regulated in Vermont. And my understanding is it's also modeled after how transportation rules in the clean transportation programs have been set up in California and Oregon.
Senator Watson?
I apologize to go back a bit, but on page 7, the first comment that you have there, there may be more than one default delivery agent. I'm a little bit confused by that because I thought that your proposal was like not just about there being one, but like if one that's bigger or something, you know, it's more of a central role, so how, can you just explain that comment?
Yeah, I think having this form of flexibility is helpful going through the rulemaking process. You might learn it makes a lot of sense to have more than one. And you know, I haven't discussed this with anyone at Vermont Gas, but Vermont Gas, for example, might want to be its own default delivery agent for its own customers, rather than having it being forced to contract with one statewide default delivery agent, because Vermont Gas already has efficiency programs, it already has some renewable natural gas in its system, et cetera.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
This is just a language clarification that we're saying the annual percentage reduction shall be the same for all obligated parties. The way it's currently written, I think we would interpret it that way even without this word added, but adding the word reduction makes clear we're talking about the same percentage reduction for all entities. We're not saying everyone needs the same percentage amount.
So just on that one.
Yeah.
Can you walk through without the word reduction, what sort of your concern is, and then how inserting that makes it more clear?
Yeah, so
Not gloss over without really slowing down, seems like an important clarification.
yeah, I think it is a helpful clarification because, you know, we're looking at each obligated party's contribution to the thermal sector. So let's say one entity has a 10% contribution of emissions to the thermal sector. If the reduction that's needed across the board to meet the climate change, the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements, if that percentage is a 20% reduction across the board, then we're making clear that that 20% reduction is applied to all of the entities, whether you're 10% or 1% of the contribution. The way it's worded now, the word percentage could be interpreted as saying that we're looking at the 10% or the 1% of the contributions. And so this makes clear it's the reduction that's the same for all entities.
You know, that used to be one sentence, and percent here twice in one sentence was problematic, so. The first sentence is about what share of the total emissions your fuel sales constitute.
Yes, and those are going to be different numbers for all the entities. So that it was a little confusing when the next sentence said the annual percentage shall be the same. That sounds like you're making those the same, but what you're really saying is the reduction should be the
Everyone's
same.
obligation to contribute all the things for the same, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so then this comment you've seen in previous versions, but the red lines here, we've built this up some, and I believe this is consistent with what Ms. Tchaikovsky has added towards the end of the bill, making clear that the Department of Taxes can share this information with us. But we think this is really important additional language to have in there. And so essentially what we're saying is instead of just giving us the list, we would like to get the actual forms that were submitted to the tax department. You've seen those forms. I doubt any of them actually contain anyone's social security number, but if someone did put that number on there, then the Department of Taxes shall redact that before sending it to us. But then we're saying everything else should be a public document. We would make those documents publicly available. And we also have some provisions in here that would direct the Department of Taxes to change the form and make clear that additional information is needed. And also have a prominent notice on that form, letting all these entities know and this is going to be public, even though tax forms normally aren't, this one will be. And so the specific information we want is what Mr. Coda has been advocating for a while, that we would have the exact amount of gallons of each fuel type listed on that. But then we've also added some additional information that we think would be very helpful from an enforcement and an implementation standpoint. And that would be a list of the exact amount of gallons of each fuel type, separated by type, that was purchased by the submitted entity, and the name and location of the entity from which it was purchased.
Sarah Wilson?
I am glad to see this. I am wondering if, I'm wondering about the timeline for this, because just the timeline that this bill proposes to get things rolling. We're gonna need some data to even, get any DDA up and running, or to do some estimates, right? So I'm interested in starting to collect this data basically ASAP and get it to you all for analysis as soon as possible. Do you think that there is a need to include any like deadlines or timeline for collecting this data? Or is it sort of, because those forms, as far as I can tell, are collected quarterly, not quarterly. But in any case, however often they're collected, we should get the first iteration of them as soon as we can.
Yes, that would be helpful from our standpoint, but I would say I think it's important that the form get revised first, and that be sent out, including the prominent notice to everyone doing that form that this is going to be public information. And so I wouldn't want to tell the tax department to send us all those forms right now. I think we'd want to have the tax department make the changes to the forms, put the new forms out, and then when the next quarterly payment comes, those could be sent there. And we listed this as annually. As I think about it, it would probably be more helpful from our standpoint to get those if they're being filed on a quarterly basis. But I also understand it might be easier for the tax department to just do that once a year.
And we don't know necessarily what their timeline for collection is on this. But
I'm sure Mr.
I'm
Coda,
sure we have
I thought it was quarterly, but
We're at the editing and discussing as a group phase. So Mr. Coda, you know about this.
Yeah, so we file, we used to file quarterly. That was changed when we went to 2 cents rather than a percentage basis. So we file monthly on the 25th of the month. We report all gallons sold in one lump sum during that month,
so monthly, that's
25th of the month,
the 25th of the month.
for prior month. So
Right.
we will file on February 25th for all gallons sold in January. It will include propane, kerosene, dyed diesel, and heated oil.
That's really good to know, thank you.
One lump number.
Yeah, it makes me, it's really good to know that there's that granularity of detail. So at this point, you're not anticipating that we need any kind of like timeline, no later than someday to get that data collection rolling. If not, that's fine. I just want to put that out. It's something on my radar anyway.
yeah, it's a good thought actually that we don't have a timeline in here. So I think there would be benefit to that. And there would be benefit to getting these on a monthly basis if that's when they're being submitted. And we have not talked with the tax department, so I don't know administratively how difficult that might be, but I imagine it might be some work to get it set up. But then it might just be hitting a button once a month and the forms all go to us. And so that would be preferable. Again, some of the provisions, if someone is a new entity selling heating fuel, there's a deadline for them to register with us. And so the sooner we're getting the information, the better in terms of checking if those entities have registered with us.
Could you speak with, this makes more sense in my mind for you to speak directly with tax about their sort of ability and interest in reforming and redesigning the form to add the greater level of detail that parties need and when they might roll that out. Happily, there's a long phase in here, so but it'd be helpful, as Seth wants to say, probably to get out of the books what the timeline looks like.
If I may suggest, it would be, I'm just speculating here with no other input, so it's open to being wrong about this, but I think I would think that we would want to start collecting this data as soon as the heating season for next year starts. So ideally, if we could be, especially if it's on a monthly basis, collecting by, like, getting that September data and moving forward from there. Anyway, just speculating. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if this bill goes into effect upon passage, then yeah, I could certainly direct the tax department to make this change immediately. And you know, agencies do anticipate legislation that's headed their way. I know we certainly have done that. The tax department would do that as well. So if they see this in the version that leaves the Senate, they can start their work now in anticipation of that form needing to be updated even on July 1st, if that were what the legislature decided. My guess is they would want a little more time. But I do think there's a benefit that sooner the information can be collected.
Thank you. Any questions on this section? All right.
We do just have a comment here noting that the Department of Public Service has expressed to us that if that form could have additional information about where the fuel is sold, that would be helpful for their purposes of looking at the enhanced energy plans.
And just so that people are aware, there's also a conversation about what data ANR would like to get for the greenhouse gas inventory. So I asked Ms. Chakowski to draft language that supplies more detailed data from tax to Department of Public Service as well as ANR for their tracking of greenhouse gas emissions. And that is going to travel through the Budget Adjustment Act because they're already looking at that greenhouse gas data right now. And prior to this ever becoming effective, it will be helpful to have better emissions data. So it's a little confusing because we're talking about tax playing a role in two different ways. Please.
Just because I know there's been a question about whether it's like the language that we know is coming around the definition of of who's the obligated party. I'm wondering if there needs to be anything added about, like, was this for sale for whole, asking about wholesaling versus retailing on this form.
So what we're saying is, where did you buy it from?
Yeah.
And the presumption is you're buying it from a wholesaler, and then going out, and these are the retail entities that are filing this form. So wholesale entities, as I understand it, are not filing this form with the tax department. And so, as we said before, and we talked about this, there is a bit of a mismatch in that the obligated parties would be a number of retail entities, but it would also be wholesale entities. And so the additional information on the form would allow us to track and see if those are matching up.
Got you.
So if a retail entity says, I bought X amount of gallons from Global in Burlington, we could add all those up from all the retailers, and then we could look at what Global filed with us as an obligated entity that brought that fuel into the state, and see if those numbers match.
Thank you.
This is a small change, just we suggest you could take out the words future sale if we move to the system where you no longer have the tradable credits. But we do have a comment noting that an obligated party could still sell any excess credits, but we don't think that those words would need to be in the statute for that. Again, changes to make there could be one or more statewide entities.
And if someone's, just for people who may be looking this later, we're on page 14.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ray. Yeah, this is this comment that we made previously, and then we're just in this version, we're spelling out what it would look like to make this change to default delivery agent in the presumed model of meeting the obligation.
So we got a comment this morning about the bill was silent on whether the default delivery agent is a for-profit or not-for-profit entity. Have you thought about that? You're not flagging it, the bill doesn't flag it, and I think it's partly based on our prior experience. I'm just wondering if that testimony gives you pause and makes you think we should consider the nature of the entity that's providing this service.
I think the bill directs the PUC to issue an RFP. And so, we would have certain criteria by which we would be evaluating responses to that RFP. Cost to serve as TDA, competence, experience, things like that. And so we would weigh those types of things.
Okay.
And we currently regulate not-for-profit utilities and we regulate for-profit utilities. And I think the key from our standpoint is that we're regulating that entity and we can look at how they're spending their money, and if they're spending more money to one particular entity, we could investigate that and see, is that entity actually providing it at the least cost, or is there some other reason for that? And so I think from our standpoint, it's less about for-profit or not-for-profit. It's more about us having the jurisdiction and authority to regulate the entity.
Thank you. Sarah White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. We had it implicated in previous testimony that perhaps the reason that it hasn't been changed to being a nonprofit is potentially because there are for-profit motivated folks who are maybe moving the process along in their favor. Is that something you've experienced? Have you had conversations where folks have been asking you to have it remain for-profit?
I haven't had those conversations.
That's fine.
Nor have I.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a suggested addition on the changes to the cost of the credits taking effect not less than 180 days after adoption. We would like the flexibility to amend that period if we conclude that that would be a more accurate representation of the default delivery agent's anticipated costs, but with the protection in there that it would never be less than 90 days advance notice.
It reminds me of the fishing for things, but as we're seeing it, it reminds me of the whole thing of trying to build flexibility in so that the program can be adjusted in a timely way as we learn things like operating the program.
Yes, and I mean, I anticipate we will have situations where literally all the stakeholders come to us with a change that they want and no one's opposed to it. And we want to have the ability to do something like that and not be restricted by statutory language that says here it's a very strict, you can't ever do less than 180 days. And so this would give some more flexibility there. page number here, it's like. I said it is page 16. This is the language that I believe the Attorney General's office has already sent over to Legislative Council, and we agree with these changes just to clarify what type of statements or representations are subject to compliance. And then this is the language that the Attorney General's office has cleared in terms of the reference to the Consumer Protection Act. So we're supportive of these changes to make that clear.
Thank you. And thanks for keeping that dialogue back and forth with AGOs. That helps sort the language out, plus with Legislative Council. Senator McDonald,
So we're back to the rule or order question
okay, are you on a particular page?
that the commission may amend its 180-day advance notice, which has been established as a policy matter. So we're going to establish it as a policy matter and turn it over to the PUC to pick the 180 days or whatever else they might choose in lieu of the 180 days. Is that correct?
Maybe you could explain your thinking again.
Sure. So, well, one example that comes to mind is if the price is going down and we see that the costs are going to be less than anticipated, we would expect a lot of people coming to us and saying, lower the price as soon as you can. And so we'd be able to do that with 3 months notice instead of 6 months notice. I think the notice requirement is really focused on a price increase, but technically as it's written, it applies both ways. And likewise, the flip side, the default delivery agent could come to us and say, if that's what the price is, we're not going to be able to do the work we need to do, and we need an increase, and we could evaluate it, and we may determine that that needs to happen with less notice. And so it gives flexibility both ways. Ultimately, we would be bound to set the price that the numbers show we should be saying it at.
But the bill doesn't say that you should be able to set the price that the numbers show. It says you should be free to set the price you think's best. And you're telling us today that if the numbers show something, that's what you're likely to do.
I don't think it's just what we're likely to do. As I understand it, we have to meet specific requirements, reductions in the thermal sector. And so I do anticipate there would be debate over what that price is of a cost of a credit. And there may be some areas where there's some amount of discretion in how we resolve that debate, but ultimately the decision on what the cost of credits is going to be driven by the numbers.
I feel more comfortable if the language of the law said that when the numbers change, then the price of credit will change, rather than relinquishing that policy decision to what, I'm going to use the word whip. What's that? PUC may or may not see.
So, Senator McDonald, can I ask a quick question? I appreciate where you're driving. I think driving at. There is some language on line 14, for instance, that in adjusting the delivery, default delivery agent cost, credit cost, commission shall consider default delivery agent anticipated cost to deliver measures and costs borne by customers, among other factors. So, is predicated on some cost analysis. Is that
Line 18, or in line 18, it says may amend. But if the cost analysis calls for it to be amended, then they shall amend it. Where's the discretion in here? Why is the discretion being put forth when, based on the language that you just cited?
So the intent of the amendment is to talk about the timing of the amendment. It's not changing the factors that the commission would consider. So right now, let's say that the year begins January 1. Right now, the bill says we need to determine the cost per credit 180 days before January 1. If we allow for some regulatory process to come up with whatever that number is, that means we're in, late winter, early spring, considering what costs will be for the next year. And I think the proposal to add a little bit of flexibility about when that change takes place might allow us to take into consideration new information that would come about.
So why wouldn't it say that it shall be amended 180 days? So is discretion being allowed not to amend it if the calculation calls for it to be amended?
I don't think we have that discretion under the existing bill. I think we're regularly looking at what is the cost per credit. And the proposed amendment here is, do we have to make it 180 days before the start of the year, or do we have a little bit more time to work with? That's all we're asking for.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I think the change ought to be made within 180 days of when the mathematical calculation calls for it. Not, it either happens or it doesn't happen. Or why, if the mathematical calculation called for it, why wouldn't you amend within 180 days?
So we do have to come up with a different number every year. We have to do that. And this bill is saying, as I read it, that we do that once a year, and there's got to be at least 6 months advance notice before it takes effect. And so this would give us the ability to adjust that number with less notice if, as we got closer to the number actually taking effect, we saw that some underlying assumptions that we had have changed. So this is just a change to the notice, the amount of notice that the obligated entities and others would get before there were a price change.
So it's a should now, a may shall question.
And it's a policy, and it's a policy decision. The policy decision is when the numbers change, it's automatic. It's not they, you do it. I've heard the culture out too.
Okay, so I'm gonna flag that one. We'll keep Bill mindful that we have a fair amount more territory to cover.
Oh, it's like, look at them showing up.
Okay.
The section 8125, these are just changes to delete the word tradable, because if we have the centralized default delivery agent model, we would need to create a trading system. We still do think there's a benefit, so now on the page 19, we still think there's benefit to changing that shall in the list of eligible measures to the word may. Provide more flexibility. If the examples that have occurred to me is one of these measures may be replaced even in the next few years by something that is much more technologically advanced, cheaper, gets greater greenhouse gas reductions, and we would be obligated under the current language to still give credit to a system that might not make sense. And so this would give more flexibility.
So a system might not make sense. Now we're talking about making changes to a system that might not make sense.
I think it was objective. paraphrase, so that's my understanding. There could be a technology listed that is eclipsed by something more effective, and so you wouldn't want to provide painting credits for installing an outdated technology or suboptimal technology.
Yes.
And then we have to hear it. That's cool.
I think that tag works through those details. Center west, that's center white.
Is it, it seems to me that with outdated technology, like, I guess I'm thinking of this list as things that, I guess I'm picturing like a schedule of like, here's different technologies, here's what they're worth. And it seems to me that if there was a newer technology, it's not like you would need to necessarily take the older technology off the list, but that you could just, it wouldn't appear as beneficial as some newer technology that was maybe better from a carbon perspective. So I guess I'm seeing this list as like, these are the things that have to appear on the schedule.
Yeah, and I guess that some of these, like when you get towards the end of the list, like the last one is the supply of green hydrogen. I think you've heard testimony that that's still in its infancy, it's still being tested. And so for instance, if we received a definitive study that hydrogen causes more problems than it solves, then we would have the option of saying that's no longer a clean heat measure if Shell is changed to May. If it remains Shell, then any entity that is in the hydrogen business could say, no, you have to count that. Here's the emissions reductions, ignore the other downsides to that technology.
Okay, thank you.
Center white.
Thank you, Chairman Bright. That was exactly my question, which was around green hydrogen, and if we were to change this, I almost wonder if we would change what is that is the one measure that I think I appreciate the may over the shall. The other installed measures, not necessarily. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to if you would then not do some of, if this opens up any concern that you wouldn't do some measures that we do have listed here in favor of things that we are not aware of now. Does it open us up to anything like that?
I view the language with the may to open the door to technologies that we can't conceive of right now.
Yes, but does that then mean that we could be having difficulty, like we wouldn't use these as the first go-tos? Because that's why I like that we call these out explicitly, is we know for a fact that at least the first few of these are clearly the direction we want to go. So I just have I'm wondering if you could allay my fears on, we're not, this is not an attempt to hold out for something we're not aware of, that you still would use these as the main. Why would we call out eligible measures at all if we're moving it to a may versus a shall?
These would all continue to be eligible until proven otherwise through the technical advisory group, for example. And we need to leave open some wiggle room for what customers want, you know. So I think they might want to do a heat pump water heater, or they might want to install some new measure that comes along in a few years. So.
Okay, but then why would we have a list?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. If you change it to May, it is just saying, these are the things to make sure you're looking at. But again, this is I do think some of this comes down to, there is going to be a lot of work that the commission has to do to really dig into this. And there's been high level testimony on each of these measures that they make sense. But, you know, for instance, there's two different types of water heaters, heat pump and solar hot water systems. if the federal government, the way the Inflation Reduction Act incentives are coming in, if it turns out that the benefit for a heat pump water heater is way better than the benefit for a solar hot water system, then we might look at that and see that it costs so much less to get the exact same outcome that we're actually not serving Vermonters by allowing this other option. But with the shell language, we would have to credit a much costlier option in that scenario. And so that's
Okay.
why we'd like the flexibility. I understand the legislature may not want us to have that flexibility. At the end of the day, any decision we make is going to be subject to a lot of scrutiny by stakeholders. People can challenge our orders, our rulemaking, and the legislature can change something if we went astray from what the legislative intent was. But that's the idea, is to give us the ability to make the right choices in the rulemaking as this process goes forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This conversation is just reminding me of a mental flag that I have for the question around how does either a technology or a fuel come off of the list? Like when we do, there's a section later that's review of consequences. I don't know if this is I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what your ideal, like, let's say we do this review and turns out that one of these fuels is actually terrible, right? And we'd like to not give it any credit anymore. How do you picture that process happening?
Well, under the current language, we would have to come back to the legislature and say we need an amendment to this statutory provision.
Because of this list.
Because of the shall, yes.
Because of the shall.
Yep. Under the may, we would be able to put it out for comment from all the interested stakeholders, and then either through a rulemaking or through order, change the list of eligible measures.
And I just want to check one other understanding that I think I have about this, which is, are we considering this list exhaustive? Like, okay.
No, we're
I
not
didn't-
reading it that way.
Okay, so like other things that are not on this list that could generate carbon reductions could be considered for clean heat credit. It's just,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
I just
the-
want to make sure that, because that's how I understood it as well, so.
Yeah, the word include means we can credit other things if someone makes a case it should be credited. And I want to be clear, we anticipate all these measures would be eligible
Yeah.
clean heat measures. But I'm also thinking 10, 20, 30 years from now. I mean, this is a program that's going to last for decades. And so if you put it in statute that these things all shall be done, then it ties our hands from, like I said, we could have a situation where all of the stakeholders are telling us, you got to change this, but we don't have the authority. We'd have to go
Mhm.
and get the statutory language changed.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we're up to 23.
I'll try to move quickly through the last few. Tom, do you want to address this one?
Yeah, this is consistent with what we testified to last time we were here, is trying to address the question of double counting and how does all of the work that Tier 3 is doing, that the efficiency utilities are doing in the thermal sector, they're absolutely contributing to greenhouse gas reductions in the thermal sector. How can we make sure that we're accounting for that, but not creating uncertainty about who gets to claim savings, et cetera? And so this is what this language does, is say, we're going to take those things off the top and the obligated entities have to meet the remainder.
Okay, so that it seems like key part of the rewrite here is may only take credit for the additional amount of service supported. So they get additionality.
Correct. In the comment, for that final sentence, it says this, this mirrors what's done in the RES program for tier 3.
Thank you. Any committee comments, questions on that one?
Thank you, Chair Wright. I think I've said it before. I think that the way the program is structured right now, the concept of the double counting is kind of a misnomer, or it's not the proper way that I would refer to the situation that's occurring. So while I appreciate the attempt to clarify, I don't actually think that the concern is one that I share.
So let's keep reviewing. As we can take them back to the question.
Again, we changed just a word change, credit registration to credit verification. And then these are changes consistent with what we've testified about with not having a tradable credit system. And I think they're pretty self-explanatory that we just clean up some of that language. And just flagging, we had this comment before, it's not clear to us with the equity advisory group how long that entity going to be in place, if it's time limited or if it is going to exist in perpetuity.
If you were asked, speculate, I would think, because we're uncertain as to how equity will be addressed through other mechanisms at this point. It's left as a permanent part of the program. I can certainly imagine over time, the state taking out environmental justice more broadly, that we would make an adjustment downstream if it made more sense to integrate it into another program as opposed to at this moment. The only way we can guarantee for ourselves that this program brings this lens to work is to include it as a program in the future.
Yeah, and again, we're not taking a position one way or the other. It's fine if the legislature wants that group in perpetuity. As we noted, we take diversity, equity, inclusion very seriously, and it's going to be front and center in all the work on this program if we're given this program. And actually that leads into these changes to the public engagement section. In a previous draft of comments, we were really truncating this quite a bit, but we've now worked on some language that spells out more clearly what we would be doing in the pre-rulemaking process before there's the formal rulemaking that the Administrative Procedure Act applies to. This is spelling out our really our normal process for full stakeholder engagement and hearing from everyone who comes to us. We have put in some specific provisions here about making sure the equity advisory group is automatically a participant to that proceeding, and that we're actively engaging that group with any suggestions they have for us. So I could just walk through, I won't read it word for word, but anyone who wants to participate in our proceeding could just register. As long as they have an email address, they can register with EPUC, and they get every notification automatically. Anyone files in the case of filing public comments don't get blasted out by email, because we heard some feedback. People don't like getting hundreds of emails in a day if something generates that many comments. But any main filing, any commission order would be sent out to all the participants. Any notice of the public meetings would go out. And so we flagged there would be at least 6 public meetings. That's in the current language. They'd be recorded and transcribed, publicly posted, open to everyone, including all stakeholders, members of the public, and all other potentially affected parties.
Can you remind us, for folks who are not regular email users, can you just remind us of how someone who wasn't a regular email user could also participate?
Yes, so, well, if they register in EPUC, that's the easiest way. If they call our front office, they can be added to any proceeding. We did, up until recently, have a process where parties, in legacy cases, the older ones before EPUC came into effect in 2017, you'd have a number of paper parties to a proceeding. Under new rules of procedure, someone does have to get a waiver to participate by paper, and it's often showing that they don't have access to high-speed internet. But I will say, for a rulemaking proceeding like this, I would envision that most people do have email addresses these days, and I would get a little worried about trying to add a burden on our clerk's office to send out paper documents of every single notification that goes out. And I cannot recall an issue about someone not having an email address. It may be, as you said, Chair Bray, they're not checking it frequently, but I do think most people do have that ability.
But someone, for instance, could still get a notice by writing a letter submitted to your clerk.
Yes, absolutely. And we would, if someone came to us and said, I want to hear about any hearing that's happening, but I don't have an email address, our clerk's office would definitely take a note and figure out sending notices by mail to that entity. But I wouldn't want to put that in the statutory language. And then the deletions here are just where it gets much more prescribed about what actually happens at all of those hearings. And so we've redrafted this to look more like what our proceedings look like, where anyone who shows up and wants to say something, we're going to hear from them, regardless of whether their issue is the designated focus of that particular session. And we provide at least 3 rounds of opportunities for written comments. I should mention, anyone can file, once we open the proceeding, anyone can file comments at any time. But we would have at least 3 specific rounds where we solicit information on a particular issue that we wanted to learn more about. And then a provision that specifically directs us to seek input from the Equity Advisory Group on organizations and communities that we should invite to participate in the public meetings and the opportunities to comment. That might be it. Let me just check. Yep, that covers it.
Thank you. And I'm like calling out the conversation we've had in the past. So section 7, which provides appropriation under 35. This committee will work with appropriations to find a steady and predictable funding source for the bill, as opposed to a one-time appropriation. You've indicated it's important to be able to hire the staff you need in order to attract the candidates you need. It's difficult to do that if it's, in essence, a time-limited temporary job. So I talked with the chair of appropriations, and I never count any chickens before they hatch, but we'll have the conversation again. Thank you. Any committee questions for Mr. Gamber? Mr. Watson?
Thinking about the start of all of this, if there was just one DDA, I could imagine that they may need some startup funds to get transitioning, but we wouldn't know what that is now, but in the reports that you will be bringing back to, the legislature, does it make sense as a part of that, for you all to contemplate what any like startup funds might be? Or do you feel like that's outside of your scope?
I can say I haven't thought about it up until now, but it's a very real question you're asking.
Okay.
So it'll be part of the process and potentially part of the reporting to you.
Okay, cool. Again, it's on my radar. Thanks.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much for continuing to work with the committee and outside parties who express interest and concerns, while the rest try to make a proposal that delivers the policy in a way that we think we can implement efficiently and enforce as well. So, Senator McCormick.
I want to apologize to the committee for saying this so late in our process, but I've been waiting, hoping that things would come together for me, that I would. Usually at this point in the development of legislation, I can picture after the bill passes, what's going to happen. I can envision what the world will be like after this passes. I get it, though. What we're essentially doing is directing the PUC to put together a kind of a Rube Goldberg. Well, it is. I mean, it's a fairly densely complicated process to achieve a fairly direct goal. I understand that, the clearest way to any goal for government is a collection of mandates and prohibitions, but that's heavy-handed, and people resent it, and well, they might. So we look for gentler ways to nudge things. But I don't see how this works. I need to understand this better, and also I'm trying to follow the money, where the money comes from, where the money is, how it's used, and where it ends up. And I don't have that picture clearly yet. That's not a question. It's a non-progress report. So I would appreciate any help I can get.
Well, I think one of the things we will, that I'm interested in, other people are interested in having some summary documents, whether it's visual or otherwise, to help some define the different gears, how they turn, and what they end up doing. We're all welcome to our own assessments of where we're at. I would object to the notion of this being Rube Goldberg, because Efficiency Vermont is a well-crafted program, and it is a really one model for what the PUC is anticipating development. So I think Rube Goldberg would suggest uncertainty and ad hocism to me. And we're not taking an ad hoc strategy. We're going through a rulemaking that runs 2 years with ample testimony by interested parties in order to develop a rule that then comes back to the legislature for review over the course of the entire session.
Now, when I say Rube Goldberg, if you look at an actual Rube Goldberg, it always achieves its intended result. Then what makes it so interesting is how elaborate the route is.
Term of endearment, is that?
I wouldn't call it endearment, but I think what I'm saying is that there's a complexity here, and early. I mean, we have done the right process. What's happening is it's not working for me in this particular case. We started out with the big picture, the bold strokes, which we should. I did not fully get it, but that'll become apparent as we go along. It would have been inappropriate for me to interrupt the further testimony, which has been already into the weeds. And I understand, and I do get the clear sense that the rest of the committee has a much sharper understanding of this bill than I do. And so again, I've been reluctant to waste the committee's time. And I figured just I need to do my homework more diligently. And usually when I do that, I get a good result. At this point, I'm thinking I'm haunted by Chuck Bohai, used to be in the House, and he used to say, never vote for a bill you can't explain to your constituents. I guess that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, well, we'll work on that because you won't be alone. Other people will have questions and want to understand it. So we'll keep on learning and finding ways to communicate how it works. Sure, one second.
Thank you. So two things. One, I would also be happy to chat offline, if that's helpful, but also, I would go back to the idea of not switching to not a market exactly. One of the things that I actually had an aha moment this weekend. Oh, that's a terrible pun.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
I
Oh
love
my
it.
gosh. That one of the reasons why this, I think is rightly named, Affordable Heat Act is because a market will find, because it requires installations, the market will find what is affordable for the measures that need to be installed. And I appreciate that. If we eliminate the market, I think you were speaking to this right at the beginning of your testimony, but I just want to revisit it. That in this model that you're proposing, there's a different mechanism to find the cheapest or the affordable level for folks.
I view it as the market is homeowners working with contractors and fuel dealers to do what's right for their house or their business. And the change that we've proposed is not at that level. It is, do we have some type of unknown tradable trading system that needs to be developed? Or do we have one or more agents that help to facilitate, the counting of clean heat credits and retirement of those credits, et cetera?
So because you would still have the required number of installations to meet our goals, that would still continue to bring the price down for clean heat measures, even if they're not traded exactly.
That's my vision.
Yeah, I mean, the market exists today, that if you want to put a heat pump in your house, you have multiple options you can go to, and that would still be the case. Those entities would be still competing for that business to do it at the least cost possible.
Except for that under this bill, in any form, it's that they must meet, there are installations that have to happen. And so it's kind of like you have to, instead of just being like, oh, supply and demand, it's sort of like we're jacking up the demand.
Well, I guess I don't know if it's increasing the demand as much as the incentive would need to increase.
Right.
And so the amount that needs to be collected from the fossil fuels that have an obligation, that would increase, and the amount of the incentive would increase. And so that is a change to the current market conditions. You're disincentivizing the use of fossil fuels and you're incentivizing the clean heat measures. But I think that's the same under the current model of the language and under the model that we're proposing. But we bring it into a model that we're more familiar with and we have success with, relative to the energy efficiency utilities. And I'll also add in, Tom, chime in if I'm incorrect about this, but I do think that layer of having the default delivery agent there can have some benefits in that contractors do have to be approved by them. And so it decreases the chances that a contractor that's a fly-by-night operation and might put in a poor quality clean heat pump, that there's more of a check on that happening. Does that sound right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you remind me, like the Building Excellence Network or?
There's two terms. There's Building Performance Institute and there's an Efficiency Excellence Network.
BPI,
which are both oriented to quality, right? That's every different. Right. Well, thank you for coming over. Thanks for bringing forward a new draft. And committee for reading through and having a sharp eye of what's going on. Tomorrow we'll have council back and a next draft with changes incorporated and flagged. And then we'll, I would propose that we adopt that as our next draft, and then also subject to further amendment, and we'll keep on, as I like to say, maybe no one else likes to hear it, painting ourselves out of the room, starting in the far corner and working towards the door. Not the other way around. Anybody have any other comments, questions, observations? All right.